up next we have Lyle Anderson. Let's all switch into that. Ready? Lyle Anderson was born in 1946 in Kalamazoo, Michigan, USA, and raised just outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in Jefferson, Pennsylvania. He attended Kalamazoo College from 1963 through 1967, receiving a BA in mathematics and physics. He attended Iowa State University at Ames, studying solid-state physics until joining the Navy as an enlisted man in 1968. He graduated Electrician's Mate A School in 1969 and was halfway through nuclear power school when he was picked up for Officer Candidates School. After receiving his commission in 1970 and while awaiting Naval Nuclear Power School at Submarine Development Group 2 in Groton, Connecticut, he developed a, quote, a methodology and a computer program for a real-time application of sonar information that was, quote, a major contribution to solving the complex anti-submarine fired control problem. That work led to a nearly 40-year civilian career in combat and intelligence systems development work. Since retiring in 2014, he has gone back to the investigation of mathematics and physics that was interrupted in the summer of 1968. Lyle Anderson.
Hello. So I'm going to start doing what they taught us in the Navy. My name is Lyle Anderson. I'm going to tell you about the laws of form and Heim's theory of everything. Then I'm going to tell you it, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. So at the end, we'll end up with this diagram, which is a representation of human beings in the way that they are organized in this dimension that's called X5 here, which is a dimension of organization. It's a quality dimension. And at each level, there's a different kind of thing. So down at the bottom here, we have the physical world, atoms, inorganic, and the next level up is the living organisms. And then we have a region here called the psyche, which is where the mental activities take place. And then there's this higher level of organization, which kind of models the whole thing. And these activity streams here are the connections between the ethereal world and the world of form, as the Platonists would say, the ideals, and the way the things are implemented. And the information goes up and down the activity streams to connect to the world. Now see, where was the next Zoom slideshow? Come on, do it next. There we go. Okay, Heim's approach was to describe the form of the world first, the structure of matter, and then understand the interactions. And so instead of like the standard model and string theory, they deal with the interactions between particles. They treat particles like dots or swinging strings, vibrating strings, and so on. But Heim started out by doing the structure first, and the proof that his theory is correct is the fact that this table was produced, which calculates correctly the masses of the elemental particles. If you can see the difference between the calculated value and the measured value, and it's, I mean, that's close enough for government work all the way around. Heim starts out with a concept. When you take these equations that make the mass equations, you can use them in cosmology to figure out what the beginning is. And the primary thing is that space is quantized in terms of areas, and space is 6-dimensional. So in the 3 dimensions of space, excuse me, in the 3 dimensions of space, the universe started out as 3 concentric spheres. And so if you look at the cross section, it's a circle. And so we've got a circle that's marked. If you take the world as marked, unmarked, marked, unmarked. And then the law of calling was invoked. And so all of these spheres began to multiply. And as they multiplied, the universe, because the content of these spheres represents the universe grew bigger, and the individual spheres were condensed and they got smaller. And this is the way Heim describes it in one of his documents, that as the diameter of the universe grows, the size of the metron was what he calls it, gets smaller. So here's the calculation. And the interesting thing is that at time 0, which is like 10 to the a googolplex years ago, when the universe was just one set of 3 trinity of spheres, the dimensions on these spheres, this is the 18 inches in terms of a radius, and this is the middle one is the sacred cubit, and the big one is 6 feet, the size of a man. So we've got sizes for the beginning of the world that match what the ancients kind of used as their measures of things. So in this sense, what Heim does is the continuum is put where it belongs, and that is the boundary of distinctions. And so there are no continuous lines, and everything is we're gonna be able to do the automaton construction of the world. And that's how come that particular discipline works. So when we take the 3 spheres, we get the idea that Spencer-Brown's reentrant form is maybe the source of all things. And so it really is forms all the way down. Now, the other characteristic of a drawing of distinction is that if you do it with a compass and a rule, that you have a direction and a spin. And so all of Heim's areas have a fundamental direction and spin. This is captured in this excellent book, The Intro to the Physics of Astrophysics and Cosmology of Gravity-like Fields, that Dozer and Hauser have published, and that's available on Amazon. I recommend it highly to anybody that wants to really look into the math in English. Without knowing it, so we've got that it's forms all the way down. This is the basic fundamental idea, is that you start with a form, you start with distinctions, distinction being in 6 dimensions, and you end up with the world. Now, the idea of there being 6 dimensions for events to take place he does the analysis of it, and in terms of Keplerian orbits, 3 dimensions, 3 real dimensions of space is the only thing that has stable orbits, 3 or less. And for p = 3, you have stable orbits. And that means that there are, time is, of course, an imaginary thing that goes in one direction. And he has 2 other dimensions, the x5 and the x6. And these are organizational dimensions. The x5 is primary, that defines the structure, and x6 influences how the structures transition between each other. So, and I was struck during the presentations that this looks remarkably like the 6 initials in 2 groups. So that's another connection from Graham Ellsbury's primary algebra talk. Now, in these 6 dimensions, you have 4 forms of elementary structures, and this is going to be another connection. So the A type is x5 and x6, and this is outside of space and time, okay? It's not, this is the reason it's so hard to talk about, is because it doesn't have anything to do with anything that we can talk about. It's the area of mystics. This is where Plato's prime forms live. And it has to do with gravitons and we'll see it, what he calls activities. So this is where, field masses can come from. Now the B type is time plus these two other imaginary things. And this is where everything moves at the speed of light without retardation. Okay, so this is the area of electromagnetic field and photons. Now, when you add in the real dimensions, the R3, the space dimensions, you get ponderable, but you take out time. Okay, you get ponderable neutral elemental particles. And then when you put it all together, when you add time back in, you get ponderable electrically charged particles. So it seems like we got the four simple expressions for that's the source of the fundamental interactions in R6. Again, this is just speculation. I haven't actually been able to prove any of this. So, and then we got Herschel's four basic kinds of full nuclei that Randy talked about. And I think that's going to turn out to be from the same sense. Now, what happens with the matrix of these metrons is they can be deformed. And this is this hermetic, yes. That is an idea that he has, and it's going to be used, and he calls these condensations. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of new terms here because these are a lot of new concepts. And I was struck by the fact that what Sahu said about in the design of Noor, his section on that, about these intersecting distinctions. And I think that's probably on to something. And then the other thing was about the re-entering of the mark re-entering itself, and the toroidal solenoid. And again, there's all kinds of stuff that happened here regarding Klein bottles and the work about that kind of stuff and topology that fits. Now, let's go through what comes out of the various sections. The structure of the form A, okay, this is what he calls activities and gravitons. And these are, they connect the organizing coordinates to the real world. And here, the biggest thing that comes out is that this theory predicts that gravitons propagate at 4/3 the speed of light. So that's where the space drive, there's an interaction between electromagnetics and gravitics that allows a work drive to be, and that's probably where some of the UFOs that have been talked about come from. Now, when you add in time to the structures, you get these little toroidal shapes. And this is this structure, the structure flux he calls it, and that's what it's a re-entry type structure. And the interesting thing about photons is, of course, that they are in just the imaginary dimensions and the time dimension. So that's the reason that you can put as many photons as you want in any space, because they don't actually take up any space. Now, when you rotate your little solenoid here so that it intersects with the real space, but not with time, this is where you get the neutral particles. So the neutral particles are out of time. Interesting. And then when you rotate it some more so that you have some of the solenoid of structure, the structure flux in the time stream, then you can get, depending on the orientation, electrons and positrons, or you can get regular old charged particles. So this is all in the physical thing. And then what he has done, and we'll see, is the structural organization is where things like thinking and stuff go on. And he comes up with this idea that life is constructed in a fourfold way, which again is tying in, I think, to the laws of form. And particularly into the BF calculus, so the square root of -1 that Lewis and Arthur talked about. So, and this gets even more thing when we get into the quaternions and the lattice diagram for their Q calculus. And that's probably the calculus that we need to do this. So here's a better explanation of what the qualitative dimensions are. X4 is time, and that's coordinates changes in R3. X5 is the antithetical coordinate, and it's interpreted as a measure of the quality of time-varying organizational structure. X6 is termed the anionic coordinate and is interpreted as a steering coordinate for the dynamical stable state. So these two things together are anti-entropy. Okay, this is where the order in the universe comes from. X5 and X6 work together, so they organize and steer the flux structures. X7 and X8 are the information coordinates, and this is where entropy comes from. And this is what we're not really going to be talking about, is how things interact, which takes place in here. But that is where entropy. And the remaining four coordinates are the God dimensions, and that he doesn't really talk about them, but what the theory shows is that these control the probabilities in the other 8 dimensions. So this is where the plan, the story is written in the God dimensions, and it's played out in the other 8 dimensions. Now this is where it gets really kind of interesting, because when he starts out, he talks about connections of predicates and sentences. And so Leon, this is not math, but this is actual putting together words. And then you have a new concept, something that creates a new concept out of old concepts. And you get these circular rings, which he calls syndromes. And then there are other operators that go to the next level. Now, what happens is that when you get to a certain level, 4 of these guys come together and they form this syndrome at a different level. And this is the fourfold nature of the thing. So he calls it a totality of syntaxes of degree 0. Then what happens is, then again, we're moving in X5. And so this gets organized into fundamental particles and at T1 level. And then you move on to the T3 level and you start getting elemental particles, atoms, molecules, and different levels of organization. Till you finally get to T7, where the biophore appears, biological things appear. Now, here's some of the math. I just picked one of the equations, one of the milder ones. And so there's a whole new mathematics to learn, and symbology, because it's different. But I'm thinking that connecting it to the laws of form is going to fix that. Now here's the one of the most important things about it is that we got a qualitative degree of consciousness that's connected in this model. And these were the red things back in the first picture on the cover sheet. So for organic things, there are connectivity of activity streams, and for just plain little microbes, maybe they're just one connection. For flora, like flowers and stuff, you get 2 connections. For animals, you get 4 connections. For primates and anything, and he says primates, I think this probably includes whales, dolphins, elephants, and anything that, my sense is that anything that mourns its dead what is probably on this level. And then there's us humans. And he does introduce a fairly religious thing, is because when you get to have 16 connections here, levels of consciousness. This is where you can actually get to the point where you can sin. So all of this goes back together in terms of the representation of human beings. So it means that, and what he says about this is that what in the daytime, when you're in your waking state, you're connected to the this unconscious brain. And in fact, there have been neurosurgeons who have observed that when they are checking out the circuit connections to make sure they haven't screwed up somebody's brain, that when they stimulate the toe of a person and they look for the response in the brain, the difference in time between the stimulus and the response is less than what they calculate the electrochemical transmission of the nerve could be. And so what's actually happening is when you stimulate the BIOS down at your toe, an activity string sends that what happened to it up to this area here in the psyche, and the answer comes down to your brain saying that your toe has been pricked. So that's so some concluding thoughts so that I can get in and Randy doesn't have to warn me. We know that I can show that the axioms that they talk about come from Spencer Brown's laws of form, and I'll do that. And we know that why there is organization in living matter, that comes out of the theory. And we know that all the universe and its contents and history were intended by the first creator, the first distinction. Otherwise, the laws of form is invalid. The first distinction contains all the intention that you put into it. And so when the creator made the first distinction, that was it. And then we also know that the merging of the laws of form and Heim's theory of everything is an idea of time has come. Now here are the four axioms that as Heim presented them. And so we've got the conservation principles, that's simply distinction is perfect continence. And then we've got the external principles, and that's agreement. Simplification of an expression is unique. The quantum principle is the idea of distinction and indication. And the fact that they're fields is the principle of transmission. So we've got his all covered. And this is why he says there is organization in living matter. And so it's forms all the way down. And this is a little history of the timeline. Okay, 1944, Heim was working with Heisenberg on the bomb project for Germany. And he had an idea that he could have an explosive, a chemical explosive that was strong enough to fuse hydrogen, or tritium actually, to make a bomb. So Germany could have gone directly skipped the fission bomb and gone to the fusion bomb. And so he was trying to prove that his explosive worked. And luckily he only used 1/10 of the amount that he had anticipated using. So he only blew off both his hands, blinding himself and became deaf. Luckily, he did this experiment on the one day that the doctor was at the site, and so he was able to be saved. So he was taken out of the Nazi bomb program and got time to contemplate all of which he produced. And so the other big thing is that they've released the document, syntrometric telecentric maximums, and it's been released, and I've got the links in the connection here. So that's about it. There's references, and that's it.
Thank you.
I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, I think so too.
Do you have any kind of summary of how he gets to the physical constants?
The physical constants are taken as axioms. He doesn't calculate the physical constants. He calculates the masses of the elemental particles from the physical constants.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, Andre?
Yeah, thank you very much. The Heim seems to have the answer of a lot of questions, and my question for you would be, are there still open questions even in Heim theory? So what hasn't been solved yet? What we have to wait for?
There's a lot of, well, nobody's made the warp drive, or at least they haven't announced that they've made the warp drive. There's certain cosmological questions. It seems to explain the dark energy problem, and gravitation turns out to not be a simple thing, and that it does have a limit. So some of those cosmological things have not been fully explored, but you know, I don't know how much more we can learn from observation about the intent of and the meaning of the universe from it. You have to go to other sources to do that outside of his theory, but at least it gives the structure and of things you can, you know, not do. There's no Big Bang, okay? There never was a Big Bang. The world started out and 15 billion years ago, there were little firecrackers all over the place as matter and light and matter came into existence. So that's, I guess that's about I mean, just understanding what he's written so far is probably going to take enough time before it's actually taught in a university. As far as I know, there is no university that teaches any of this.
I wonder if we could combine, while Rachel asks a question, I wonder if, Lyle, you can pull up a picture, one of the iconic pictures of this man, so we can have a good look at his cyborg arm and you know, be impressed and you know.
A picture of these. Sure.
He's like a real life sci-fi character with
yes, actually there's an actual
street assassination attempt and
well, no, it wasn't an assassination attempt. It was actually he blew himself up.
Okay. Well, anyway, yeah, Rachel has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I noticed that his background was in the Navy and in electronics, even though he's so old, he's kind of like pre-digital, pre-computer age. But with like the 16 as a special number and some other things, like his metaphoric representation of human beings looks to me like almost like a OSI, like networking diagram. I guess I was curious if he ever discussed like computing or digital influences on his work about physics.
He was pretty much, most of this was done pretty much pre-digital. Let me get some other pictures. This is, okay, that's the curvature of space. There are those guys. This is, and this is a picture of the structure transitions for a photon. Okay, we're just talking about a photon, and these are the states that go into that little curly solenoid that the state transition. So, and you can think of these things as I think of them as nested forms, and they're transitioning between each other. So this gets really wild, of course, and this is the simplest one, which is the photon. And there's yeah, they're watching it. So I don't know what more to say. I mean, there's a wealth of information that's out there now. The whole of his work's been published. And I can put the link in the chat.
This is so cool, Lyle. Like, and you know, and if you search that document, for Konrad Martius, of course, you'll find points where it shows, you know, the inheritance of some of these general concepts. Although, you know, Konrad Martius was also a theoretical physicist with her own ideas about the aeonic space-time and a Pyric space-time in her ontological interpretations of, respectively, Einstein's relativity theory and Heisenberg's quantum theory in her 1950s books, Der Raum and Die Zeit. You know, and so she, and in an earlier work, 1940, Der Selbstaufbau der Natur, she has these categories of like the Wesenentelekie versus the Bildungsentelekie, and how each of these corresponds to like the Wesens material or substance, you know, and a mass hyletic potency, and she puts her own like particle physics in terms of these kinds of categories that were influential for Heim, in fact. Now, I do think Heim takes it in, you know, a different direction, and he does start, it resembles more of one of these natural attitude scientific general, you know, grand united theories, and that's great, you know, but that is a little different, right, at the foundations, isn't it, than the kind of like mystical work that does develop a physics, a natural physics, you know, from someone like Konrad Martius, or even anthroposophically extended natural science, like you find in the Gertianum as well, like other schools, Koenig, Karl Koenig, you know, stuff like that. Like there's a lot of like very spiritual developments of the Entelechy theory in interesting directions that are just like, they actually look just like the diagram you have where, you know, for these you know, not just intelligence, but like emotional or you know, higher spiritual values. The values themselves are in these higher dimensions in these different theories. So it's just like you have it, you know, which is really cool. It's cool to see like this scientific development of this side of Konrad Martius. I mean, that's how I'm seeing it. And I agree, this is a universal ontology. It's just interesting to compare the differences in their foundations and their generalities.
Well, I don't know if Heim ever met Martius or whether they interacted. He was pretty much in a engineering environment. And he didn't get into much academic stuff, and he didn't publish much, and that's how come nobody knows about him. But of course, we know from the laws of form, since that was what happened, that was what was allowed to happen, and so, you know, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, in Munich, and she in the 1950s, she ran a space-time reading group with Alois Wenzel and other scientists. You know, we have to move on now to Kate. Do you want to make one last?
Sorry, great talk, fantastic. Did Heim know of Spencer Brown? Sorry, I missed that from the talk, or was it nothing at all?
Did you catch that, Lyle? The question was about
Did he know
whether Heim might have ever touched the material of Spencer Brown, you know, like anything past 1969 in the Heim timeline? I
don't think so. I don't think that you know, they were ships that passed in the night. So they're together now. So that's
yeah. I saw that on the timeline. It's good. It's good.
Yes.
2022. All right. Thank you very much, Lyle.